Can the economic survey give us a clear roadmap? What have been the big highlights? I'm talking about all of this and more with Prachi Mishra. She's former Chief Systemic Issues Division of the IMF. We're speaking on the economic survey and, of course, on the eve of the budget. Ms. Mishra, great to have you on NDTV Network. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Absolute pleasure. Let's start with one key point or key data point in the economic survey, and I'm keen to know your view on it, is the growth outlook, the GDP growth outlook that the survey puts across. The forecast is between 6.5 to 7%. Is it a conservative forecast, considering that a lot of global agencies have actually upped India's growth forecast to 7%? We have grown as high as 8% in the last quarterly numbers.
Thank you, Tamanna. A pleasure to be here. So I think let's put your question in a bit of perspective. I think the economic survey actually very rightfully highlights the impressive performance of the Indian economy despite a series of domestic and global shocks. So for FY24, actually real GDP growth, as you know, is estimated at a whopping 8.2%. And so this is a third successive year of strong growth. So if you look at 7% against this backdrop, it's definitely not conservative. And in fact, the survey correctly highlights that in the medium term, what you need is a sustained growth, and note my note the emphasis on sustained growth. So if we can really sustain growth of 7% or more in the medium term, that can take us to achieving the goal of Viksit Bharat. So long story short, I think the forecast, the projection of 7% or between 6.5% to 7% is realistic. It's prudent, and don't forget that it's against the backdrop of a series of very strong growth years. Let me stop here.
Okay, so it is, it's not conservative. 7% definitely isn't. I was talking about the lower end of it, 6.5%, looking at the kind of growth we had. Also in the context of another statement that the Chief Economic Advisor made, talking about strong growth in private capex. I thought that was fairly interesting, Ms. Mishra, considering that this has been our bugbear, isn't it? That private capex is not coming back or not growing at the extent which is required. What are your thoughts on that? And if there's anything else which really stood out for you from this year's economic survey?
Right. I think actually the survey correctly points out that private GFCF as gross fixed capital formation has grown. We are seeing growth in private capital, the private sector capital formation. So I think for FY, if I'm looking at the figures correctly, for FY24, it was about 8 lakh, even above. It's actually close to 9 lakh, very close to 9 lakh crores. It's up from, if you compare, pre-COVID, it was about 5 lakh crore. So private sector capex is picking up, and a lot of high frequency indicators are pointing to a pickup in private sector capex. Real estate, as you know, real estate after series of shocks, the real estate sector and construction is picking up, and we are seeing private sector capex picking up. But many high frequency indicators of investment, even if you look at investment good imports, or you look at cement, several of these indicators are actually fairly above pre-pandemic levels. So I think the survey correctly points out that we are actually seeing a pickup. And again, I think what is important is to sustain the pickup. And so to go on to your other question, what really stuck to me from the survey is it really, while it highlights the resilience of the Indian economy, At the same time, it does strike appropriate caution. And it highlights the importance of achieving sustained growth, sustaining the achievements so far, to take, to achieve our bigger goal of becoming a Viksit Bharat. And there, as you know, the survey lays out 6 priority areas, which include, which include, among other things, giving the right fillip to agriculture markets as well.
Yeah.
Let me stop here.
Yeah, so I started, in fact, this conversation talking about how the economic survey, and we often as journalists at least look for clues from the economic survey to what we could see in the budget. Would you say that the Viksit Bharat roadmap is definitely one of those clues? It's going to be a big focus, and the economic survey lays out with quite a bit of clarity how you get there.
It's hard to, guess, I think, what is going to come tomorrow. But I think if you ask me, first and foremost, I think it clearly seems that the government will stick on its plan for fiscal consolidation, whether the number is going to be 5.1 or slightly below that, but it's fairly clear. I would expect the budget to stick to its path of fiscal consolidation. Highlight the asset. Another important thing which the survey highlights is the asset monetization program. So the asset monetization program actually is gaining quite a bit of traction. Some of the targets that were highlighted in FY22 budget are actually being fructified now. So I do expect a continuation of. How do you stick to a fiscal consolidation target when you are increasingly moving to capex spending? And as we know that public sector capex has played a big role. How do you sustain that? And I think one of the ways is through raising resources. And the asset monetization program has been one of the flagships. And I was very encouraged to see that the survey highlighted that the program, the asset monetization program, going back to FY22 budget, because these things take time, is actually beginning to gain traction, and it's very close to what was targeted.
I want to just get your sense also on the PLI scheme, and I thought this was another highlight. Now we know, we have been seeing that the PLI scheme has really worked, especially in some segments, your EMS, mobile, etc. IT hardware also will be one to watch out for. So that's what the economic survey also says. These schemes are gathering momentum as of May 2024, delivering handsomely. I want to understand from you, Prachi, do you think that there is room for more? Do we need to now expand PLI schemes to other sectors? Is that the way forward to achieve our goal of an impetus to manufacturing?
I think I think on the PLI scheme, let me also, it's very closely linked to the discussion of employment as well. And I thought, I think the survey, makes an important point about, the private sector to come forward and to join what the survey calls as the collective social responsibility. So I think so on the PLI schemes, I think again picking sectors. First of all, again, it was encouraging to see the survey that how the PLI scheme has worked in several aspects. I think a careful evaluation of what has worked and what has not, and putting putting the eggs respectively in those baskets, I think would be the way forward, in the sense that which are the sectors which the PLI can target, and which can also be consistent with creating employment, more employment and good quality employment for an increasing, for a workforce as the labor force participation increases. So I think, long story short, I would say that again, encouraged to see, some of the evidence on PLI. It would be good to see more of it, and accordingly, targeting sectors which can boost manufacturing, but at the same time boost those sectors which also which are also intensive in domestic employment, because as India is a labor abundant country, but increasingly we have seen capital to labor ratio, or companies increasingly employing capital intensive techniques. So if the PLI scheme can actually be catered to industries which are more labor intensive, that can be like killing two birds with one stone. So basically, you can give a boost to manufacturing. At the same time, those manufacturing sectors which have the potential to create a high employment. But let me also add that when we think about PLI schemes, we mostly think about manufacturing. But in principle, you could also think about high value agriculture, and this is something which one of the 6 pillars which the survey highlighted was also, exploiting the untapped potential in agriculture markets. At some point, high value added agriculture could also be, one of the candidates for, boosting the employment potential, of course, but also the export potential in agriculture.
Absolutely. So not just for semiconductors, also to help turning potatoes into potato chips, for example, could all be ways to use PLI schemes.
Absolutely. Food and beverage, textiles and food and beverage are the two largest, the two sectors which employ the highest, have the highest employment share in manufacturing, actually.
Just one last point, Ms. Mishra, and this is just because I found this so interesting and so important and wanted your view on it as someone who sees the economy so closely across the world, actually. So the economic survey talks about a lethal mix that could undermine public health and productivity and diminish India's economic potential, and marks out 4 factors: social media, screen time, sedentary habits, and unhealthy food. Goes on to warn, quote unquote, the private sector that don't push this at the peril of the nation's future. I just thought that was very, very interesting. What is your take on that? That there is an actual economic and a negative economic impact of things like this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think I really appreciate the fact that the survey has gone beyond standard bread and butter stuff, which is, just the economy, growth, inflation. If you actually look at the employment section, again, I'm focusing on this lot is in discussion. If you look at the employment section, I think it points out something very interesting, that employment is about dignity, self-worth, self-esteem and self-respect, and standing in the family and community, and not just about the income it brings. And that is why it is in the enlightened self-interest of the Indian corporate sector swimming in excess profits to take its responsibility to create jobs seriously. So I think this is another example of where, in addition to what you said, I think, how do you boost productivity? How do you, how do you create good jobs? I think you have to go to some of the basics. And actually there is research which has shown that, increasingly, Indian kids are getting into, snacking habits, and it has detrimental effect on their health and productivity. So again, I would like to explicitly acknowledge and, appreciate making the ambit of the survey a little bit wider beyond just the forecast for this year growth and inflation and maybe the current account. So absolutely, Tamanna, absolutely, I would say, looking a little bit beyond the narrow focus, I think is much appreciated, and it really adds flavor to the survey.
Completely. I found that an astonishingly insightful commentary coming in from the economic survey. Thank you so much, Ms. Mishra, for speaking with us. That was Prachi Mishra there on her take on the economic survey. And of course, we look forward to hearing you on the budget day after the announcements have made.